Also, pointers are seen as being very unsafe,
Yep.
and they are. I mean, as you know, anytime that you're using pointers,
Objective-C.
yeah, well, yeah. So, I mean, if that pointer now is referring to something else that no longer exists there, something wrote it, and now you're affecting some other variable, pointers are absolutely unsafe. They just jump you right into some part of memory. You don't know what the state of that memory is. So if in C# a pointer must be used, on its own as a pointer, it's allocated in its own section of memory marked as unsafe memory, which is really interesting. And pointer memory, that segmented area of memory, is unmanaged. So you're responsible to clean it up after yourself to make sure that you have a greater chance of tying up all your loose ends. But memory management in general is handled by a garbage collector in C#. It's actually a very effective way of handling memory. So memory management cannot explicitly be deallocated when it's handled by the garbage collector.
Yes, no, that's managed memory.
Right.
Now, when we start talking about the .NET framework, we're going to get into the differences between what is managed and what is unmanaged. So keep that in mind. But Brian, that's a good point about the garbage collector. So we have several IDEs out there for C#. Now, one of the premier IDE is the Microsoft Visual Studio IDE, more specifically Visual C#, which we're going to be kind of dabbling in as well throughout this tutorial. But we're going to start you guys off with the open source version of, or at least the open version of C# or .NET, which will be using the MonoDevelop IDE, which still uses the Microsoft .NET framework, but it offers an alternative for developing C# applications, just in case you don't have the means to get your hands on Visual Studio. It also has a couple of things like GUI development uses GTK Sharp, which is an extension of GTK Plus with .NET hooks. Now, those of you guys that know what GTK is, that's the GIMP toolkit, and it's kind of like a Linux, used often in Linux to develop graphical user interface applications. There's also .GNU or .GNU, which is an open source C# compiler, and there's tons and tons and tons of other implementations of this, but I think these are the three dominant ones.
And the thing that we really want to show you is that, to be honest, Microsoft's IDE for Visual Studio is so convenient that it's kind of like an ultimate luxury IDE, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's so convenient that it's almost difficult to appreciate the language as a language.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people actually start developing in C# and don't really appreciate it as a language and don't really develop an understanding of what's happening, because the IDE actually just does so much for you,
right?
And it sounds kind of weird. So that's why we really want to start, like we've started all of our other courses, where we start on the command line. You really get the feel of this language as a language on its own that can stand on its own 2 feet, with a text editor and a compiler.
Yep, absolutely.
And then we'll go from there into MonoDevelop so that you can see that it's really not platform dependent. You really see it as this is the core of the language, so you can kind of clearly differentiate what's the language and what's
and with MonoDevelop, if you're running a Mac, you can run this on Mac. If you're a Linux guru, you can run it on Linux and Windows as well.
People actually use Mono for writing iOS applications on iPhones and iPads too, which is interesting. But so that by the time we get to Microsoft Visual Studio, you'll really be able to appreciate what Visual Studio is doing, what it does for you, and how it allows you to interact with the .NET framework so easily.
Absolutely. So there are many different ways, Brian, that C# is implemented in the development field. What are a few off the top of your head? Don't look at the slide.
Well, the big ones are Windows services for server applications, Windows applications, any kind of web development that runs on IIS, which is Windows it's like the Microsoft version of Apache. It's the Microsoft web server that runs ASP with C# in the back end, Silverlight content sometimes, and you have Windows mobile development. Sometimes you have embedded CS scripting language, like you have VBA, like Visual Basic for applications and stuff. Similar to that, you have C# script, where you can kind of embed it and use it as a scripting language. Also, IIS and C# do a nice job of kind of making these web services for you that are very easy to expose, easy to get up and running, and easy to interact with. And they kind of take a lot of the SOAP guidelines and a lot of the the WSDL structure and stuff. They sort of take a lot of that out of your hands and just sort of provide it for you. So you can really knock out web services very quickly using C#.
And it's also cool because you can add remote web references that are web services.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like in your program, you can, instead of importing a DLL, you can just make a reference to a web service.
Exactly. So you just literally say, I just want this, whatever this web server provides, I want this to be in my application. It's really, really cool.
Right, and that's really nice for large companies who want to try to, if you have a lot of disparate development groups, and you really want to make sure that you're exposing platform features to other teams to incorporate the larger intelligence of the business, that's a great way to do it.
Absolutely.